Hello and welcome to the very first episode of Cyber Risk Podcast. I'm your host, Sakit Bajoria, the Chief Product Officer at Safe Security. Thank you for joining us as we deep dive into the ever-evolving world of cyber risk management. This podcast is dedicated to exploring the breadths and depths of cyber risk management, especially how it intersects with business and cybersecurity in the age of AI and automation. We'll bring you conversations with thought leaders, innovators, and practitioners who shape the landscape of cyber risk management. Our first guest in our podcast, David Reilly, former CTO and CIO of Bank of America. It's an absolute pleasure to have you, David. You have been mentoring us for over 3 years, and I have personally had the privilege to talk to you over 100 interactions. We have learned so much, and that has helped us shape the company and the product. Would love to take some of our interactions to the larger audience, especially the risk leaders and the security leaders out there. With that, David, welcome to the podcast, and would love to get started with setting the stage with the fundamentals. So, David, in your own words, how would you describe cyber risk? And where does it fit in the context of overall business risk?
Well, thank you, SB, and thank you very much for the opportunity today to talk to you and our audience about this critical subject and to share some of the journey that we've been on over the last couple of years. So I think one of the things that's really evolved as an IT practitioner now, when you consider cyber risk, I think as a community, the practitioners have done a great job in progressing the idea that cyber risk should be considered in the context of every other risk that you would be concerned about inside the corporation, not just in IT, not just in cyber, but across the enterprise. And so how one thinks about, if we use financial services as an example, credit risk, market risk, liquidity risk, counterparty risk, placing cyber risk alongside that family of risks, I think is the place we need to get to. And incredible progress has been made in getting us to a point where cyber is now seen as an enterprise issue and an enterprise risk, not necessarily an IT risk. I think if we rewind the clock a little bit, it was seen much more as the purview of the IT team, less as the whole corporation. So I think now, completing that journey, getting to the place inside your enterprise where your chief auditor or your chief compliance officer or your chief risk officer views cyber in the same way they would those other business risks like liquidity, counterparty, credit, and market. And increasingly, which we'll talk about a little bit later, recovery and resiliency risk, I think is where we need to be. So ensuring that it is a business risk, that there are multiple stakeholders for, chief among them, the CISO, I think is where we need to be positioning cyber risk across our businesses.
Awesome. Now, double-clicking on that, David, when you talk about enterprise and you talk about cyber risk, how critical is it for organizations to approach cyber risk holistically for the enterprise?
I think it's vital. Again, part of the maturation that as practitioners we're going through, in that same way that a few years ago inside of an enterprise, cyber risk may have been seen as almost completely the domain and the purview of the CISO. Sometimes I think inside of IT, we can compartmentalize those different risks and not show the holistic view of them as they interact with each other. For example, traditional cyber risks, penetration vulnerabilities, patching vulnerabilities, those kind of things, primarily the domain of the CISO to articulate, but it's the application and infrastructure teams that really need to do the work to remediate those and deploy those patches, deploy those vulnerability fixes. But then you can't ignore end-of-life risk. We as practitioners have to have exactly the same purview and exactly the same view of the risks that our third parties that we rely on are undertaking so that we can stitch those things together.
Yep. Now, David, in the financial sector, you're very used to looking at financial risk in actual dollar terms, right? Now, talking about measuring cyber risk in quantifying cyber risk, what do you think are the challenges and what do you see as the need for quantifying cyber risk, and what do you think are the challenges in doing so?
I think there are a couple of things here. If we go back to our original point, we want all of the business stakeholders to be on the field with us. We don't want them in the stands watching. We want them on the field with us, taking part. To do that, we have to be able to articulate the cyber risks that we're running in a way that is digestible to non-IT practitioners. And beyond that, to risk officers, if you're a regulated industry, to your regulators, many stakeholders. There are a couple of things, tough lessons that I learned, things that I got wrong, that in hindsight, I would have done differently and did adjust over time. First of all, articulating the cyber risk in a way that's digestible means getting to the headline as quickly as you can. Are we okay? Are we not okay? And to what extent are we not okay? I think sometimes we can confuse, as a set of practitioners, we can confuse non-IT practitioners when we articulate our risk. We do that not because we're trying to confuse, but because we're trying to show we have full breadth of knowledge and understanding of everything that's going on. That's great. But there's an expression, selling past the close. We often do that as practitioners. Over communicating is something to be careful you don't do. Transparency is the most important thing. Being comprehensive is the most important thing. So I think whenever, as a practitioner, if I've got accuracy, if I'm brief where I need to be, detailed where I need to be, consistency, I think for me is probably, as we've talked about, SB, probably the most important thing, because we have to bear in mind the multiple stakeholders we have to bring on this journey with us. They don't have the understanding that we as practitioners do. And we're not going to change that, nor should we try. Consistency, history, trending is, I think, key in helping them come on that journey.
Sure. That's something, honestly, I've learned here, David, in the risk world. I was a practitioner myself. And when I used to live in the world of threat actors and vulnerabilities and techniques and tactics, when Log4j came out, we were all expecting the world to understand Log4j. We were expecting the world to understand what we mean by each of those technical terms, right? But then now I understand that, talking to different audiences, you have to speak their language, right? So end of the day, for example, if you have a vulnerability, so let's say I come to you, right? And you have been in so many boards and you exactly see how things are being communicated. And, so one thing I would love to learn from you here is that if we have a critical finding, like a 9.0 vulnerability and stuff like that, right? So, and now when you are being briefed about it, right? As a stakeholder, how would you like that being briefed? And you've talked about the concept of BLUF. If you can talk about that, that would be very valuable.
Yeah, this idea of bottom line up front is something that I think the best CISO I ever worked with taught me. And it goes back to this idea of I've got things that I've got to communicate, and I need the audience to understand them in the shortest possible amount of time. And this idea of the bottom line up front. How big a problem do we have? Are we protected? Do we have a compensating control that is mitigating this risk that maybe, in some cases in our world, in cyber, may be a news headline in the mainstream media. It may be on CNN. It may be on other news outlets. I've got an audience now. I need to say, good, bad, problem, what have we got underway? So I think in the very first line, explaining what does this mean for us? Not what does it mean for the industry? We'll get to that in a second. What does it mean for us? Are we exposed? If we are, to what degree? What are we doing about it? What do we need that we don't have? And how long do we think it's going to take before we get back to a state of satisfactory protection within our risk tolerance? One's never completely protected. This idea of risk tolerance, which we've talked about in the past, I think is key, so that you set the line at which your business understands that's what we consider to be appropriately protected. Our business is all manage risk and run risk every day. They wouldn't make any money if they didn't accept some form of risk. So understanding where that line is key. Sometimes we go straight to the technical. We go straight to the detail. And that's generally, as practitioners, that's our DNA. That's what we want to do.
Yep.
But I think you've got to kind of hold yourself back, SB. Get the expression out there of the business impact, and then explain the technical.
Sure. Now, David, you talked about consistency and especially when presenting to the board. If you have already established that, look, my risk is X, the tolerance is Y, and here is what I'm doing to bring X to Y and reduce the risk down, right? Now, talking about the dynamic nature of cyber risk. Now, if I'm presenting the next time again, right, and I'm like, look, I'm again in red, I'm again very close to, in fact, X has further increased. And while we have done so much, and it can be frustrating for the board members to hear that, look, we have invested so much, millions and millions of dollars, and after 3 months, you come and tell me that we are doing worse than what we were doing last quarter, right? Now, how does board interpret that, and how do you interpret that? And if a CISO, what is the guidance for the CISO here to really present that problem to you?
None of us as practitioners look forward to that moment where we have to say we were on a plan to get to a certain state of readiness or protection, and we've taken several steps back, and we need to explain why. It's always a moment that you do not look forward to. But I have to say, the best advice I could give to the practitioners, SB, is your board is almost certainly way more receptive to that news than you might think. To a board member, that isn't bad news or good news. It's just news. And that's what they need. They need the transparency. But to give that transparency, I think the consistency of reporting is what's going to be key, so that they can go back to where you were a quarter ago, 2 quarters ago, however long it would be, see where we were, and then you can explain what changed.
Yep.
So we were on plan. We did not fall behind. Let's use a scenario where we've been executing exactly as we planned. Sometimes we get surprised there too. But let's assume we were executing on plan. This external event has occurred.
Yep.
And now assets that were previously viewed as well protected no longer are. There is even more remediation now that we have to do. Explaining it in that kind of context. We've gotten our asset base, could be a compute layer, could be a piece of software, could be a third party, but we've discovered a new vulnerability. The bad actors are exploiting it. We've got an exposure here. We've now got to move resources from the original plan we talked about a quarter ago to this new plan because life has changed.
Yep.
The only thing we all know, and this is true for your board members too, is that the best laid plans have to adjust because things are dynamic. And I think particularly with what's happening around artificial intelligence and the ways in which particularly bad actors are embracing those technologies to find new attack vectors and to scale out the number of attacks that they can undertake at lower and lower price points for the bad actors. Everybody understands that that's a negative dynamic that we've all got to deal with.
Attack surface, right? Like we acquired 2 more companies, we moved to the cloud. These are things that typically is not surfaced when you're presenting that we were looking at X percentage of the organization. Now that whole organization has doubled in terms of attack surface. So it may seem like we have been sitting on our asses and doing nothing, but actually the landscape is completely different now, internally and externally.
Yeah, and it could be a new vendor. We've brought in a new third party. We've completed the migration to that new third party. But there's now a set of exposures that previously we weren't susceptible to that now need to be mitigated. And I would weave into that as a practitioner. Oftentimes, you will have a compensating control to mitigate some or maybe even all of that risk. Yes, you want to tackle that vulnerability, but you've got a compensating control get that information out quickly. Because again, it comes back to that point of brevity. We've now brought on this new third party. We talked about that migration. That's gone well. We've discovered there's a vulnerability with their platform. The good news is we're protected from it, but we need it remediated. That's a very different conversation than we've discovered a vulnerability for their platform and we do not have a compensating control. It's all hands on deck to get it remediated. That kind of articulation, I think, is one of the ways I would think about when you have to engage with those non-IT stakeholders that are so important in understanding and supporting the risk remediation that you need to undertake.
Yeah. Now, David, shifting gears, in the world of automation and continuity, right? Like risk has been seen as a once in a year activity, or what you would have seen in over the years, right? But now in the world of automation, where the expectation is to automate everything, right? And practically speaking, you cannot start with everything automated. You have to. So how would you? What is your expectation of your leaders to when they present a report to you, which is latest and greatest, and some things may be automated, some things may not be automated. What is your expectation from a reporting perspective from your CISO to you?
So I think the compass to use here, the guide, SB, is its accuracy and comprehensiveness. If I cannot automate everything, that's obviously the gold standard. That's where we want to be, that we ingest the vulnerability information automatically and it is close to real time, if not real time. But there are certain asset classes or certain systems for which you may not be able to do that. Being clear on where those gaps are, what if anything, you intend to do about it, in with the aim of being complete, accurate, and comprehensive with all of the information. That's what I wanted to know. And I particularly wanted to know where we had a gap. I wanted to be made aware of what's keeping you up at night. What are you worried about? What's missing from this report? Where is the data maybe not as high quality as you would want it to be? And what, if anything, can we do about that? What does that mean in terms of how accurate we think that data is? What's the efficacy of that data, the fidelity of that data? I think being clear on that and understanding with your stakeholders that means maybe I need an additional compensating control to mitigate on my lead time between getting good data and understanding the vulnerabilities too long. And so I need some compensating controls in place to help me with that, to ensure that I'm not as exposed as I would otherwise be.
Now, David, as we are kicking off 2025, in the world of agentic AI and automation all kicking in across the board, how would you advise to shape up? How do you see cyber risk shaping up this year? And what is your expectation from the leaders with all the AI coming in?
I think we've got a bit of a mismatch in the industry at the moment between the pace at which these technologies are being adopted within enterprises and the pace at which bad actors are leveraging these technologies to do us harm. And that mismatch is very understandable because enterprises need to understand and be comfortable with the risks that one is running and that you're mitigating with the use of these technologies. But I think in the world of cyber, that's going to be different. Using these technologies to provide protection, protective measures for an enterprise, I think there's a world of difference inside most enterprises in terms of risk appetite between how you might use these technologies to protect you versus how you may use these technologies to grow your business, better serve your clients, improve time to market. And I would, as a security practitioner, I would think hard about how can I leverage these technologies to do continuous pen testing or continuous red team testing or continuous auditing. What can I be doing to match the bad actors who are leveraging these technologies to scale out attacks, to attack me more often, to look for more vulnerabilities, to do so at a much lower price point? I need to be thinking about ways that I can give these tools to my team in the SOC, in the red team, etc., to help them better fight the adversaries who are being incredibly innovative, who are doing work which is very much leading edge in terms of, unfortunately, how to do harm with these technologies. That, I think, is one of the biggest changes we'll see. And so to the extent as practitioners, we're not aggressively looking at these technologies to help protect our enterprises, that's one of the things I think we'll see change this year, SB.
One final thought there, David. So in the world of building versus buying, and where most organizations are buying technology right now as SaaS solutions and all of that, what is your overall view on third-party risk and how it plays into the organization?
I don't think as a practitioner you can look at third-party risk any differently than you look at your own internal risk.
Sure.
If you perform background checks on your staff for very good reasons before you hire them, you should have that same expectation for your third party. They won't always be able to meet it, but mirroring the way in which you think about IT solutions. Do I have a process to approve software build? How do I approve software builds? How do I approve testing? How do I approve change? How do I review access? Those same controls that you have internally for the systems that you built and you manage and you run, those should be mirrored for your third parties.
Sure. With that, David, how would you like to conclude, and final thoughts for security leaders as they approach 2025 in the world of AI? How would you like to conclude key takeaways from your side for security leaders?
I think the most important is the consistency of reporting of the risk, so that we avoid what sometimes can happen when a very dense risk report may get presented, SB. It can be overwhelming for a non-IT practitioner to internalize and absorb. What should I be looking at? How should I be responding? I don't know what to do. Being able to refer back to what was known and what was expected and explaining what changed, I think would be the last thing I would say as a piece of advice.
Very, very helpful. As always, David, thanks a lot for your time and helping us navigate through this complex system and truly simplifying this for us and the audience to take it from there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, SB.